I struggle to write melodies that don't sound too cliche or obvious. They sort of work with my chord progression, but if I strip the chords away, they're usually just repetitive and kind of predictable. That's from Reddit. That Reddit guy sure has a lot of problems. When we think harmony, we tend to jump straight to chord progressions, which happened to be the topic of my last video. But the fact is, harmony kind of underlines everything we do as composers and artists, songwriters, producers. Whatever you do with music, harmony is probably involved. And melodies utilize harmony in a unique way. It's linear harmony instead of vertical harmony, which is what we're typically talking about with chords. I've talked quite a bit about how I like to think about chords as being linear, chord progressions as being linear parts where every note moves to the next note of the next chord in a sort of linear way that make them all kind of like individual melodies. That's also called part writing. Well, what if we took the opposite approach with our melodies and considered how the vertical relationship of all of the notes of the melody stacked on top of each other can directly affect the linear choices that we make? Now, I learned this lesson while playing Olivier Messiaen's organ suite, La Chanson. Pardon my French. In the third movement of that piece, there are loads of really gnarly blocked polychords and clusters. It gets pretty nasty. But then towards the end of the piece, he reduces all of that vertical madness into a single linear line that is kind of moving at a blistering pace, but he's outlining all of those harmonies that he's had blocked before. And it was kind of a revelation to me in the way that he was thinking about this melodic idea. He's using the same harmonic language, so he's using harmonic consistency, in his case, gnarly polychords, but now it's laid out in a linear way instead of stacked verticals. You can listen to that piece on your own time or even learn to play it if you really hate yourself. Let's take a slightly more simplified example and see if we can figure out what I'm talking about. Here is a 4-chord progression. It's from my new ebook that's specifically more in-depth on harmony, and it's free. And down in the description below, if you would like to check that out, there's more details and more examples, and you can do that at your own pace. Here's that progression. These chords are non-functional, so don't worry about trying to analyze them like you would a functional chord progression, which brings me to one of my pet peeves when people on the internet try to analyze non-functional chord progressions by assigning them functions. In non-functional harmony, we don't use any of the rules of functional harmony. There is no hierarchy of chords. We have to use our ears instead. And I'll get how this ties into a melody directly in just a moment, but I do want to highlight the 3 principles that I do use in non-functional harmony when making these choices. First is harmonic consistency. Typically, I'm trying to stay within the same harmonic language. These happen to be extended tertian chords. Basically thirds stacked on top of each other and then rearranged, reordered, inverted into a bunch of different variations that I can use. It's totally possible to mix languages, like have tertian and quartal harmony in the same musical sentence and have that work. But it takes a little bit more care, a little bit more craft. If you're specifically struggling to have your chord progressions feel coherent, like they all belong together, try sticking to just one harmonic language. Try exhausting all of the colors that you can get from extended tertian chords before you start throwing in polychords and quartal chords. that's really hard to say, before you start throwing the kitchen sink at it. The second principle is harmonic independence. There are no notes doubled between the left hand and the right hand in any of these chords. What is it? Ah. Now, I mentioned this in the last video, and a couple people were like, are you saying that it's bad to double? Not necessarily. It depends on the context, it depends on your intent, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. When you double, you essentially eliminate one of your voices. So if I'm trying to create the most colorful, most harmonically rich chord possible with as few notes as possible, I'm going to try to avoid doubling as much as possible. So it's not that I'm opposed to doubling, it's just that I feel that oftentimes it's too much considered the default. Like because we're so used to playing octaves at the piano, we just kind of default to doubling when maybe we haven't even considered what would happen if we eliminated some doubling. It's worth trying out. And the third principle, which I got directly from my own composition teacher, and it was really a revelation when he put it this way, is harmonic freshness. That's his terminology, not mine. I try to avoid what he called telegraphing from one chord to the next. In other words, there aren't too many of the same notes in the first chord that are shared with the second chord. And then the third chord has mostly new notes. This is especially true in the bass because the bass colors so much of what happens above it. When he said harmonic freshness, that resonated with me really well. Harmonic freshness means each chord feels like a new color, not just a different shade of the same color. And it's kind of like a harmonic lift, which I really feel that with each one of those chords, and it makes my eyebrows go. So in non-functional harmony, anything can move anywhere at any time. And unlike functional harmony, there's no hierarchy of 5 to 1 or 4 to 1. There's no gravitational pull of functionality. So our ears have to be our ultimate guide, and the more we listen to non-functional harmony, the more enriched our vocabulary becomes. And, those three principles that I just outlined kind of guide my decision making. Ultimately, it's up to these. Now, if you're not familiar with non-functional harmony and these sorts of harmonic languages, these may sound weird or odd to you, and that's fine. A language that's not your native language probably sounded weird or odd to you the first time you heard it. Doesn't make it less valid as a language, and doesn't sound weird to those people who grew up speaking it. But whether you like the language or not, there are incredibly important concepts that we can learn from these languages and the way that we write in these languages. Especially, in this case, how this progression directly relates to our melody. Let me show you. Where in the world is our melody? I just have this chord progression, it seems like, right? That's nice, but where's the melody? Well, it's here, it's just hidden. Since we've approached our chord writing in this way, where there's a fully independent, unpredictable melody ready to be extracted, all I have to do is make it linear. I'm just going to take the notes that I already have in the right hand and play them in a linear fashion. There's our melody. It works with the chords, or the intervals, that I have in the left hand. It itself outlines, or has its own harmonic identity that is unique and not predictable because we designed it to not be predictable. It's non-functional. It has a shape, it still tells a story, it's still singable, like those principles of melody writing that I've talked about before. It's just a non-functional melody. It has its own harmonic identity. That's the phrase that I want you to take away from this. It feels connected and related to the harmonies beneath it, but it is not dependent on them. and it works well in conjunction with them, but doesn't spoil them. It avoids predictability, it avoids cliches, and instead it feels inevitable instead of predictable, and there's a huge difference. It's surprising, but not jarring, all because we crafted it with a little bit of intention and understanding that melodies and linear writing has its own harmonic identity. If you want to see more videos like this on composition and specifically harmony, which I'm talking about quite a bit these days, I have them all in a playlist conveniently made for you right here. So just click on that and binge watch this channel for 2 or 3 days, and that will help me out tremendously. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.